The lonely princess, she was a princess, born in a palace of shining towers and crystal halls. Yet in her heart, she was always alone. Every day she walked through long corridors filled with guards, servants, and nobles, but none of them truly saw her. They bowed, they saluted, they followed orders, but their eyes carried no warmth. They saw her as a symbol, not as a living being. Her life was made of rules and silence. She wanted laughter, friendship, someone to look at her not because of her crown, but because of who she really was. The Council of Elders ruled the planet more than she ever did. They used her name, her bloodline, her title, but they never let her voice matter. Whenever she spoke, they ignored her. Whenever she suggested peace, they talked of war. Whenever she asked for kindness, they spoke of power. Her throne was nothing more than a cage made of gold. At night, she would stand at her balcony, looking at the endless stars. Her people thought she was strong, untouchable, but the stars knew the truth. The stars were her only friends, silent witnesses to her loneliness. She whispered her secrets to them, wishing someone, somewhere, would hear her heart, but no answer ever came. Only the cold wind and the endless silence of space. Her people feared her because of an ancient legend. It was said that her bloodline carried a curse, that anyone close to her would face ruin. She had grown up with those whispers. Servants kept their distance. Children did not play near her. Guards spoke only when needed. She never held a hand, never shared a true smile. Her own family treated her like a shadow, something dangerous yet necessary. And so she carried her crown like a chain around her neck. But everything changed on the night of fire. The enemy came with burning ships, falling from the sky like black stars. Alarms filled the city. The palace shook with fear. The council gathered. In the throne room, their voices filled with panic. The princess stood silent, watching her world crumble. She expected them to finally turn to her, to finally ask what their ruler thought. But instead, they argued about surrender, about betrayal, about who to sacrifice, and then, from the smoke of the battlefield, a figure appeared. It was not another noble, not a council member, not even one of her kind. It was a human pilot, armor cracked, face scarred, eyes burning with something she had never seen before. He had crashed near the palace walls, fighting off enemy soldiers to reach the gates. When he entered the throne room, every eye turned to him with suspicion. But when his eyes met hers, something changed. He did not bow like the others. He did not fear her like the others. He looked at her as if she was not a symbol, not a curse, not a burden. He looked at her as if she was a person. The council shouted, ordering him to leave. They called him an outsider, a stranger, someone with no right to stand there. But the princess felt her heart beat louder, as if for the first time in her life she was awake. The human pilot did not leave. He stood still. His hand rested on his weapon, but his eyes never left hers. And in that silent moment, she felt something strange. She felt seen, truly seen, as if all her whispers to the stars had finally been answered, as if the universe had finally sent her someone who would listen. The council continued to shout, but the room felt different now. The princess did not move, did not speak. She simply held his gaze. For the first time, she did not feel alone. For the first time, she felt that someone had chosen her side, even without words. The night of fire had brought destruction, but within that chaos, it had also brought a beginning she had never dared to dream. And in that moment, the lonely princess understood. Her life was about to change forever. The council's betrayal. The council chamber was filled with golden light, but beneath that beauty there was poison. The elders sat in a half circle, their long robes heavy, their voices sharp. They had ruled for years by fear and by clever words. The princess had always obeyed, but tonight she listened differently. Tonight, her heart no longer felt silent because of the human who stood near her. The council spoke of the enemy, of their demands, of their ships circling the sky like vultures. One elder with a silver mask said, "We must give them something, someone, to satisfy their hunger." Another elder, with jeweled hands, whispered, "A sacrifice will buy peace. The people will survive." Their eyes turned not toward themselves, not toward their riches, but toward her. The princes felt the weight of their stares, heavy and cold like chains. They wanted to give her away. Like a token, like a tool, like she was not alive, her chest tightened. But she did not cry. She stood tall, though inside her heart was breaking. These men had sworn loyalty, had sworn to protect her family for generations, and now they spoke of selling her life like it was nothing. She felt the walls of the chamber closing in. Every shadow seemed to whisper, "You are alone again," but she was not. The human pilot shifted forward, the sound of his boots echoing in the chamber. He had no throne, no jewels, no title, but in that moment his presence was stronger than all the council combined. He looked at the elders with eyes that burned. "You will not touch her." His voice was low, steady like iron. The room fell. Silent, shocked at his boldness. No alien had ever spoken against the council in such a way. And here was a stranger, a human, daring to defy them. One elder slammed his staff on the ground. "You are nothing, outsider. This is not your fight." But the pilot's jaw tightened, and he stepped closer. "It became my fight the moment." "You betrayed her," he said. The words cut through the chamber like a blade. The princess felt her breath catch, her chest rising with something new. Something she had never felt before: protection. He was risking his life in front of the most powerful rulers on the planet. Not for his own gain, but for her, the elders hissed, whispering in their secret tongue, their faces pale. They had never been challenged, never been told no. But the human pilot did not flinch. His hand brushed the hilt of his weapon, not as a threat but as a promise. If they tried to harm her, he would stand against them, even if it meant standing alone. And for the first time, the princess believed she was not alone. Her heart, long frozen in silence, burned with fragile hope. She looked at the elders, her voice trembling but clear. "You swore to serve the crown, yet you planned to betray it. You swore to defend me, yet you planned to sell me." Her words rang in the air, sharp and strong. The council shifted uncomfortably, unused to her defiance. But behind her stood the human, a living shield. His presence gave her courage, the courage to speak words she had hidden for years. The silver-masked elder sneered, "Your blood is cursed, princess. We have only endured you because we must. Now we will be rid of you, and peace will come." The words struck her like a blade. But before she could answer, the pilot moved. He stood between her and the council, his back straight, his shoulders firm. "If peace demands her sacrifice, then it is no peace at all," he said. His voice echoed, filled with fire. The princess had never heard such strength spoken on her behalf. The chamber grew tense, the elders' faces twisted with anger and fear. They could not kill him here, not yet, not in front of her, not without risk. But she knew at that moment that staying in the palace was death. The council would never protect her, never love her, never see her as more than a tool. Her choice was clear, though terrifying. She would not let them hand her over like a gift to the enemy. She would not let them decide her fate anymore. Her eyes met the pilot's, and in his gaze she saw resolve. He gave the smallest nod, a promise without words. He would help her escape. He would stand with her against them. Her heart pounded, and for the first time in her life, she smiled, not with sorrow, but with defiance. The council had betrayed her, but from that betrayal came something greater. The spark of rebellion, the birth of trust, the beginning of a bond that could not be broken. And as the chamber doors closed behind them, the princess knew she was no longer a prisoner of silence. She was no longer the lonely girl in the golden cage. She had found an ally, a shield, a human who dared to stand beside her when her own people would not. The council thought they had broken her, but instead, they had awakened her, and soon, the galaxy would know what it meant when the lonely princess finally chose her own path. Escape into the night. The palace looked calm from the outside, shining under the moonlight. but inside it had become a cage of betrayal. The council's whispers still echoed in the princess's ears, their decision to sacrifice her ringing like poison. Her hands trembled, not from fear of death, but from the deep wound of knowing her own people had chosen to throw her away. Yet beside her stood the human pilot, his presence like a wall between her and the shadows. He leaned close and whispered, "We cannot stay here. They will not wait." Long before acting, the words cut through the silence, and her heart pounded. No one had ever spoken to her with such urgency, not as a ruler, not as a symbol, but as a life worth saving. The princess nodded. Though her body felt heavy with shock, the pilot's eyes were sharp, scanning the hallways as if danger lurked in every corner, and in truth, it did. He led her through the winding passages of the palace, steps quick but careful. Every corner felt like a trap. Every flicker of torchlight seemed like it would expose them. The princess had never walked these hidden paths before. Though she had lived in the palace her whole life, the pilot knew them better than she did, guided by instincts honed in battle. "Where are you taking me?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "To freedom," he answered simply, and the word felt strange, almost impossible, yet alive with hope. Behind them, voices rose, guards shouting, council orders spreading like fire. The betrayal had turned into a hunt. She realized then that she was no longer their princess. They saw her only as a prize to be traded, and for the first time, she did not mourn that loss. If being their princess meant chains, then she no longer wished to be one. They slipped through a narrow door hidden behind a tapestry, the pilot pulling her gently but firmly. The passage beyond was dark, lit only by the glow of his weapons display. The air smelled of stone and dust, heavy and cold. Each step echoed like thunder in her ears. She had never felt so fragile, yet never so alive. The fear that once silenced her was now fire inside her veins. At one point, she stumbled, the long silk of her gown catching on the stones. Before she could fall, the pilot's hand caught hers, steady and strong. The warmth of his touch startled her. For years she had been untouchable, unreachable, cursed. But his hand did not hesitate, did not fear. He pulled her up with ease, whispering, "Stay close. I won't let you fall." Her chest tightened, not with sorrow but with something she had no name for. They reached a gate at the edge of the palace grounds, hidden beneath old roots and vines. The pilot pushed it open, and the night air rushed in, cool and sharp. For the first time in her life, the princess stepped outside the palace walls without guards, without chains of duty. The world beyond was wild. Dark forests stretching under a sky full of stars. She stopped for a moment, looking up at the endless lights, the stars that had always been her only friends. Now, she was no longer speaking to them alone. She was stepping into their vast world with someone by her side. But their escape was not unseen. From the towers above, horns sounded, deep and menacing. Shadows moved across the palace walls, soldiers hunting them. The princess felt fear strike again, sharp as a blade. But the pilot tightened his grip on her hand, pulling her forward. "Run," he said, his voice calm but commanding, and she obeyed, her silk gown tearing on branches, her feet stumbling on roots, but she ran. The forest swallowed them, the palace shrinking behind like a fading dream. They ran until their lungs burned, until her legs trembled, until the sound of horns grew distant. Only then did they stop in a small clearing, the moon shining above like a silver witness. The princess gasped for breath, her body shaking. The pilot stood tall, scanning the shadows, weapon ready. For a moment, the silence of the forest felt like a blessing, but beneath that silence, danger still waited. She looked at him, her voice breaking. "Why? Why risk everything for me? You don't even know me." The pilot turned to her, his eyes steady, his face rough but kind. "I know enough," he said. "I know what it means to be abandoned, to be treated as less, to be betrayed by your own. No one deserves that." The words struck her heart with both pain and warmth. For years she had begged silently for someone to understand, And now, standing under the stars, that prayer had been answered by a human. Her loneliness, once a heavy chain, felt lighter in his presence. She still did not know what awaited them in the forest or beyond the stars. But for the first time in her life, she was not walking alone. The night was full of fear, yet it was also full of freedom, and as they stood side by side, she realized the truth. The escape was not the end of her story. It was the beginning, the human secret. The forest was quiet, but not the quiet of peace. It was the heavy quiet that comes after running, when danger still waits in the shadows. The princess sat near a small fire, her hands wrapped around herself, her gown torn, her crown left behind in the palace. She had never looked so fragile, yet she had never felt so free. The flames flickered against her face, painting gold across her skin, but her eyes were far away, lost in the storm of betrayal. The human pilot sat across from her, silent, sharpening the edge of his blade with slow, careful movements. The sound of metal on stone echoed softly, steady, almost calming. At last she broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "They called me cursed. They wanted me gone, but you stood for me." Her words trembled, as if she was afraid to believe them. The pilot lifted his eyes, and for the first time since they met, he spoke without armor in his voice. "I know what it means to be cursed," he said, the words heavy with memory. The princess frowned, confusion mixing with curiosity. "You are human. Your people do not live here. What curse do you carry?" The pilot looked into the fire, the flames dancing in his eyes. "My fleet was destroyed years ago. We came through the stars seeking refuge. But betrayal waits everywhere, even among our own." His voice lowered, each word like a wound reopening. "I watched my brothers fall, my friends left behind. I carried the guilt of survival when others did not." The princess felt her chest tighten, not from her own pain, but from his. She saw in his eyes the same shadow that lived inside her. The shadow of being left, of being unwanted. "You survived," she whispered. "But you did not escape loneliness." The pilot nodded slowly, his jaw clenched. "That is why I could not watch them throw you away. I saw myself in you, abandoned by those meant to protect." The fire cracked, sending sparks into the dark sky. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the sound of the night surrounded them. The princess studied him, seeing not just a soldier, but a soul carrying scars deeper than flesh. She had always believed humans were strange, reckless, even dangerous. But this one carried pain with honor, strength with silence. And he had chosen her side when her own people had not. Her heart whispered questions she did not dare speak. Why him? Why now? Why did the stars bring this broken human into her life? And yet, instead of fear, she felt a warmth. The same warmth she had felt when his hand caught hers in the dark tunnels. The same warmth when he stood before the council like an unshaken wall. A warmth she thought she would never know. The pilot finally set down his blade, his eyes turning toward the trees. "They will come for us," he said, calm but certain. "The council has power, and the enemy will not stop. But I will not let them take you." The princess felt a strange strength rising inside her. For years she had been silent, but now words burned on her tongue. "That I will not let them take you either," she said firmly, her voice steady for the first time. The pilot looked at her, surprised, but a faint smile touched his lips. For the first time, they were not just protector and protected, not just human and alien. They were two souls bound by pain, by survival, by a choice to stand together. The night around them was full of danger, yet in the circle of firelight, something else lived: trust. Fragile but real, and from that trust, something even greater was born. The princess leaned closer to the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames. "If you carry a curse, then so do I. But maybe together, we can turn curses into strength." The pilot's eyes softened, and for once the weight in them seemed lighter. "Maybe," he whispered. And the word carried more hope than she had ever heard. The forest remained dark. The enemy still hunted. The council still plotted. but for the first time in her life, she felt she had someone to share the night with. She was not just the lonely princess anymore. She was a voice that had been silenced too long. And now, with a human at her side, she was ready to be heard. The enemy's arrival, the first sign was not sound, but silence. The forest birds stopped singing. The night insects vanished into the dark. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The princess lifted her eyes to the sky, and what she saw stole the air from her lungs. The stars, her only friends for so many lonely nights, were vanishing, one by one, swallowed by shadows. At first, she thought clouds had moved across the heavens, but then the shapes grew sharper, colder, metallic, enemy warships, dozens of them, sliding into the atmosphere like predators circling their prey. The ground trembled as the first ships broke through the clouds, their engines roaring like thunder. Fire trails burned across the sky, painting the night with the color of destruction. The princess clutched her chest, her heart hammering. "They are here," she whispered, her voice cracking with fear and awe. The human pilot stood beside her, calm but unyielding, his hand resting on his weapon. "I told you they would come," he said, his voice steady like stone. "But we will not bow." In the capital city below, alarms wailed, their shrill cries rising like screams. The council's banners of gold were ripped down and replaced with white cloth signs of surrender. The elders did not fight. They did not resist. They opened their gates before the enemy even landed. The princess's fists clenched, rage burning in her veins. For years she had accepted her silence, her cage, her curse. But now, watching her people handed over without a single blade raised, she could no longer stay quiet. "They gave me away," she whispered. "And now they give away our world." The pilot turned to her, his face hard with fire. "Then let us take it back," he said simply. His words were not grand, not wrapped in the language of kings and councils, but they carried more power than any oath she had ever heard. The princess stared at him, the fire of the burning sky reflected in her eyes. Her fear did not vanish, but it changed. It became anger. It became strength. For the first time in her life, she felt her heart roar instead of whisper. Together they moved through the forest, reaching a high ridge that overlooked the valley. From there, they saw the enemy descending, black armored soldiers pouring from the ships like a river of death. The city lights flickered below, swallowed by smoke. The sound of engines and marching feet filled the air, drowning out everything else. The princess's hands shook, but she did not look away. She would not be silent anymore. The pilot crouched beside her, pointing toward the scattered farms and villages beyond the city. "There are still those who will not bow," he said. "They are waiting for a voice. They are waiting for someone to lead." The princess blinked, startled. "Me?" she asked, almost in disbelief. Her whole life she had been told she was cursed, unwanted, useless. But the pilot shook his head firmly. "Not cursed, not useless, chosen. And I chose to stand with you." The words cut through her doubt like sunlight through shadow. She inhaled sharply, feeling the weight of her loneliness begin to break. She was no longer just the abandoned princess. She was something greater. And as she looked out at the enemy soldiers spreading across her world, she realized she had a choice, to hide or to fight. And for the first time, she chose to fight. The pilot rose to his feet, his figure outlined against the burning horizon. "If they want this world, they will have to fight for every stone, every tree, every life," he said. The princess stood beside him, her voice steady. "Then let them come, and let them learn that we are not so easily broken." Her words rang into the night, carried by the wind, and though only the forest heard them, it felt as if the stars themselves had paused to listen. Far away, the enemy banners unfurled, black against the fire-lit sky. The galaxy was watching. The battle had begun, but for the first time, the princess did not feel alone in the face of war. She had a voice. She had a choice. And most of all, she had a human who stood at her side. Together, they would not bow. Together, they would fight. And the enemy would learn that, even in the darkest night, fire could be born from the lonely heart of a princess and the unbroken will of a human. The last stand. The valley was quiet before dawn, but it was not the calm of peace. It was the heavy stillness before war. Mist curled along the ground like pale ghosts, carrying the scent of smoke from the burning capital. The princess stood on a rocky rise, her torn gown replaced with simple armor, borrowed from an old soldier. She no longer looked like a prisoner of silk and gold. She looked like someone ready to fight. Beside her stood the human pilot, his armor cracked, his face marked with scars, his eyes sharp as steel. Together they looked down upon the small gathering of souls who had come to stand with them. They were not an army. They were farmers with tools, hunters with bows, old warriors carrying blades long forgotten. Children too young for battle stood with eyes too old for their age. Mothers carried the memory of sons already taken by the enemy. Yet in their faces the princess saw something she had never seen in the council. She saw courage. She saw hope. And for the first time, she believed her people were not lost. The human pilot stepped forward, his voice carrying across the mist. "I will not promise you safety. I will not promise you victory. But I will promise you this: if you fight, you will not fight alone." His words struck the crowd like sparks. On dry wood, the princess felt her heart swell, her voice rising without fear. "For too long you were told to bow. For too long you were told to fear me. But today, you will see I am no curse. I am your voice. And I will not let them take our world without a fight." The people roared, not with numbers, but with a sound that shook the air, a sound born of defiance. The sun broke the horizon then, and with it came the enemy. Black banners rippled as soldiers poured into the valley, their armor gleaming like iron wolves. The ground shook with their march, drums pounding like the heartbeat of death. The princess's breath caught, fear clawing at her chest, but the pilot touched her shoulder, his voice calm. "Fear is not weakness. Fear reminds you what you stand to lose. Now use it. Let it become your fire." She nodded, gripping the blade at her side, her pulse steadying. The two sides faced one another, silence falling heavy. The enemy outnumbered them 10-1, their weapons sharper, their armor thicker, their discipline colder. Yet in that moment, the princess knew numbers did not matter. What mattered was will. What mattered was standing together. She lifted her sword high, her voice rising above the valley. "Today we fight not as slaves, not as shadows, but as one people, one world, one fire." The rebels roared, the sound crashing against the valley walls. The first wave of enemy soldiers charged, their cries tearing through the air. The human pilot moved like a storm, his blade flashing, his body a wall of steel and fury. The princess fought beside him, her arms trembling at first, but her heart steady. Each strike of her blade carried years of silence breaking, years of chains shattering. For every step the enemy pushed forward, the rebels pushed back. Farmers struck with axes, hunters fired arrows, children hurled stones. It was chaos, but it was not surrender. The battle stretched as the sun climbed higher, blood staining the mist, cries echoing through the valley. The princess felt her body ache, yet she refused to fall. Each time she faltered, she saw the pilot at her side, and strength returned. He fought not for glory, not for conquest, but for her, and she fought not for her crown, not for the council, but for him and for her people. Together, they became the heart of the rebellion, unbroken, even against impossible odds. At one point, an enemy captain broke through the lines, his blade raised toward her. The princess froze for a heartbeat, but the pilot's arm was faster. Steel met steel, sparks flew, and with a final strike, the captain fell. The princess stared at the man who had saved her again. But this time, instead of feeling weak, she felt her courage rise. Higher, she lifted her sword and shouted, "For our world!" And her people answered, "For our world." The valley shook with the force of their voices, and though the battle was far from over, something greater had been born that day. The princess was no longer the lonely girl in the golden palace. She was no longer the cursed daughter of a broken council. She was the leader her people had always needed. And with a human at her side, she would not stop until her world was free. Never alone again, the valley was silent after the storm. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of those who had given everything. Smoke drifted through the broken trees. The ground was scarred with fire and blood, and the air carried the weight of both victory and loss. The princess stood at the center, her blade heavy in her hand, her armor marked with dust and blood, her breath uneven. Around her lay the wounded and the fallen, rebels who had stood against the impossible. Her heart ached, yet it also burned with pride, for they had not bowed, they had not broken. The human pilot stood beside her, his armor cracked, his face streaked with sweat and dirt, but his eyes were alive. He had fought like a storm, and still he remained standing, unshaken, unbroken. The princess turned to him, her voice trembling, but clear. "They said I was cursed. They said no one would stand with me, but you did." The pilot looked at her, his gaze steady. "And I will stand with you until the end," he said simply. Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with something she had never known. For years she had been alone, speaking only to stars that never answered. Now for the first time someone had heard her, someone had chosen her, not because of her crown, not because of her blood, but because of who she was. Tears filled her eyes, not of sorrow but of release, as if the weight she had carried since birth was finally lifting. The rebels gathered, those still able to walk, standing in a circle around their princess. Their eyes no longer looked at her with fear, no longer whispered of curses. They looked at her with hope, with faith, with love, and she realized then that she was no longer a shadow in a golden cage. She was their leader, their voice, their light. Her voice rose, steady and strong. "This is only the beginning. They tried to silence us. They tried to break us. But today we proved we are not slaves. We are not cursed. We are free," the rebels roared, their voices shaking the valley walls. Even the wounded raised their hands, their cries rising to the sky. It was not the sound of victory alone. It was the sound of a people finding their spirit again. The princess felt her heart swell, tears falling freely now. And when she turned to the human pilot, she smiled through her tears. "You gave me back my voice," she whispered. He shook his head softly, his eyes gentle. "No, princess, it was always inside you. I only reminded you how to use it." The stars began to return above the smoke, shining faintly through the fading night. She looked up at them, and for the first time in her life, she did not whisper to them alone. She did not feel small beneath their endless light. She felt strong. She felt seen. She felt alive, because now she had someone standing beside her. Now she was no longer alone. The enemy had been pushed back. The council had fled into shadows. The future was still uncertain. But the princess no longer feared uncertainty. With her people at her back and a human at her side, she felt ready to face whatever storms came. The loneliness that once defined her life had been broken, shattered like chains falling to the ground. She had found trust. She had found courage. She had found companionship, and that was stronger than any crown, stronger than any curse. She turned to the pilot one last time as the dawn broke across the valley, painting the world in light. "I was always alone," she said, her voice soft but filled with fire, "until the day you chose me." The human's lips curved into the faintest smile, tired but true. "And from this day on," he said, "you never will be again." The sun rose high, burning away the mist, and with it, a new chapter began. The galaxy would remember the battle. It would remember the rebellion, but most of all, it would remember the lonely princess who found her strength, and the human pilot who chose her side. Together, they would face the stars. Together, they would build a future, and in that future, she would never, ever be alone again.